back to another Doctor Who Big Finish main range review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at February 2018's release for this year, and it is of course Ghost Walk, the second release from the Fifth Doctor trilogy for 2018, and it's written by James Goss, and it's one of those episodes that looks naturally very creepy on the front, so naturally I'm very excited by it. And I had a right to be excited, not going to lie, because I finished this one last night, and I felt like I almost stepped back into Halloween again because it was a rather spooky release. As per usual, in the description below I will leave the link to go buy this release from the Big Finish website. It's currently out now. The physical CD is $14.99 and the digital download version is $12.99, and due to this being a part of the Big Finish main range, there's no pre-order price or anything like that. It does naturally stay at that price, I do believe, forever, in fact, unless it goes on sale. And then I do believe that it will be in other stores such as Forbidden Planet, Amazon as well, in about 2 or so months' time, something like that. I do believe there is a little bit of a delay. So as I was saying, this episode is written by James Goss, and once again, much like the previous release, is directed by Barnaby Edwards and is produced by David Richardson, and does of course star the Fifth Doctor, Peter Davison. If you're interested by what I say in this review, I do recommend checking out the trailer on the Big Finish website. You can either listen to that or download it, as it is one of those very atmospheric stories. It does have a rather nice sound design behind it, which I will get onto in a little bit. But yeah, first off, starting off with the characters, we may as well start off with Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor. And once again, much like other Fifth Doctor releases for the Big Finish main range, we're going back into that almost sort of quite dark version of the Fifth Doctor that we admittedly never really seen within the actual TV series itself. I think that his Doctor has definitely sort of had a new area of Doctor Who to blossom in. I think that the TV show version of the Fifth Doctor is very happy. He didn't really have too many moments apart from his rather actual dramatic ending, because he wants to have this very happy and fun Doctor, and then his ending that he in fact meets in the caves of Androzani is rather grim, so it is a rather odd contrast. But Big Finish managed to actually do a few darker stories with his Doctor, and this story is definitely one of those. We see this Doctor definitely challenged by himself, as he's actually sort of trapped in these catacombs, and he's in there for quite a long period of time. It is in fact sort of the classic version in a way, or the classic equivalent of Heaven's Sent, which naturally, if I'm comparing an episode of Doctor Who to Heaven's Sent, probably one of the best episodes from the new series of Doctor Who, then it is in fact quite a big compliment, and especially only like 3 minutes into the review. So that is sort of the main comparison I can give for this release. It is a little bit like what if the Fifth Doctor was sort of trapped in a catacomb type, castle type thing, underground. However, it was for a long period of time, and we almost have this odd sort of spooky paranormal element in there as well. So yeah, it is a rather fun story, however a rather challenging one at the same time. I'm going to do something quite rare for this review, and in fact skip out all the companions immediately straight away, and skip onto a main character for this release that isn't one of the main companions. That is a character called Leanne, but without her, this story essentially wouldn't have a backbone. It is kind of the main gateway of the paranormal aspect of this story, in the way that it can kind of get through into modern day, and she is played by Fenella Woolgar, who you may be able to actually remember her name from other Doctor Who stories. She's in fact the same actress who played Agatha Christie in Unicorn in the Wasp in Series 4. So yeah, she is very good for this release. She is rather sort of a little bit spooky towards the very beginning. She's naturally very good at doing the ghost walk aspect of this story, and sort of the promoting of the paranormal to the public people and the different tourists. I think that she's a very fun character. However, in the later half of the story, we almost have this kind of mental health aspect brought in of what if she's just imagining this voice in her head. I think that she definitely portrays this character very nicely throughout this release, and I think that definitely she's one of the main elements of this story that I do really like. Now moving on to the other people for this release, we of course naturally have the Fifth Doctor's TARDIS team that is rather big. So starting off with Janet Fielding as Tegan Travanka, Sarah Sun as Nessa, and Matthew Waterhouse as Adric. And I'm going to sort of cover them all in this review as what sort of one character, because really for this release I kind of feel that they didn't really have too much to do. They are split off from the Fifth Doctor very early on in the story, and they are sort of taken out of time and put in different places. Adric and Nessa are put into a certain area. Tegan is kind of actually put on sort of the back burner for the majority of this story, which I don't particularly mind, because I think that sometimes with different stories with the Fifth Doctor, you either need to involve all the characters, much like how we had in the previous story being the Kingdom of Lies, where all the companions had a certain part to play because they were once again all separated out almost into different teams, or you have this version of the story where you have all the companions kind of put to the side, and then we have a more interesting story just with the Fifth Doctor and maybe another character for this story. And I think that definitely this one is a good choice to have the different companions being split off into different times, and allowing a different aspect of the story to kind of shine through. So I think that naturally we didn't really have too too much of the companions in this release, but I don't particularly mind that because I think that this story definitely supports itself by itself very well, so yeah, that is good. But generally, overall, natural compliments for this release of the companions are very nice. I think that they did once again represent what is seen in the TV series rather well. Natural compliments for Nessa as well, much like in the previous release. I did in fact rather enjoy her in this release. Adric is getting a little bit more of that studenty aspect once again of the Doctor almost being his teacher, and Tegan is naturally her old annoying self. We do have a few little nags about Heathrow Airport in there. After having none of that in the previous release, we do in this one. So yeah, I knew it wouldn't be long by the time we get back to that normal thing. But yeah, generally, overall for this release, the companions were very good. And also a final credit for this story that I would like to say about Sacha Juan as Matthew, who's the same person who played Waris Hussein in An Adventure in Space and Time. And I do believe that he was also in the running to be the 13th Doctor in the different polls and sort of the betting things. But yeah, he was very good for this release. It's nice to see him doing something as a different character in Doctor Who. They also have the Sebaoth or however you would like to pronounce it, played by Stephen Grief, who, to be honest, I don't really have much to say about that actual character, other than it sounded really cool. It was very paranormal, very sort of creepy, and I did really like his voice acting for this release. Yeah, generally overall for him, very good. I liked that. I liked the sort of spooky aspect that he contributed to the story. This episode is a little bit of a historical one, so naturally I was very excited because I love historic Doctor Who, and this one is based in the 17th century, and we have the idea of these catacombs that are based under this city. Now, I don't believe at any point in the story we actually refer to the city or the location of what it actually is. I think it may be a fictional city or something like that, but we do have these catacombs that are underground, and we have this idea of the paranormal and ghost sightings and things like that. And we also have later on in the story the idea of exorcism brought into there as well, which naturally I was very excited by that also because I love the idea of gothic horror Doctor Who. I think that the idea of exorcism as well is something very creepy, something which that still happens to this day in real life, and I think that it's something that Doctor Who has kind of not used over the past 50 years, and it's definitely a missed opportunity. I would like to see that maybe in the TV show at some point in the near future, or in any other Doctor Who media as well. I think it is a rather creepy thing, as I say, that could have many different aspects to it. What if you actually went down the paranormal route? What if you went sort of through the sort of alien hosting of a body or something like that? Yeah, it's a rather creepy thing, and this story we have the companions kind of personally getting involved in that, and the actual idea of having almost this myth or this sort of legend that has been passed through time, that is very much the backbone of this story, of what if this sort of main paranormal thing, these ghost sightings, are in fact the truth. However, not the truth as in they are ghosts, but instead an alien that's kind of been trapped for a very long time. It's trying to gain energy and come back to life, and we have almost this doomsday idea at the very end of the Sabaoth coming back and basically ripping apart the whole of humanity. And there is a point where you actually think, hang on, how's the Doctor actually good to get out of this one? Because we have him abandoning the TARDIS at the very early half of the story, so he can't use that. And then we have all of his companions being taken away from him one by one, and naturally at the very end of this story we do get a little bit of the impression that all the Doctors had this plan all along. However, at the same time, it does make the Doctor feel very vulnerable in the later half of the last story. In fact, you get a moment where you think this Doctor is dying, he's very weak, he's built his own tomb so nobody can actually find him in the TARDIS, because stumbling across a Time Lord body along with an actual time machine is definitely something that people could use in a negative way. And yeah, I think that this episode definitely has the idea of consequence behind it, but at the same time, I love the idea of ghost walks. I think that naturally, I would love to go on some ghost walks in real life, to be honest. I can remember when I went to London a few years back at the Ripper, and it was basically Whitechapel, and going around the different areas where the people were murdered and the different prostitutes. And I think that once again, Jack the Ripper and Doctor Who is something of which that goes in hand, and I think that Jago Lightfoot may have actually touched upon that briefly at some point, but I think that is a missed opportunity for Doctor Who. I would just love to see more of the historical stuff coming through at some point in the future. But yeah, generally for this one, the idea of exorcism, we also have Nessa being deemed as a witch as well. We have the natural thing of the sort of test by water, of her dunking in water at certain points. We also have a cliffhanger in this story where we have Adric literally being noosed to death. So, you know, that might be a selling point for this story, depending on what your opinions of Adric actually are. But yeah, generally, I think for this one, just putting these companions into these different historical settings, some of which that are very stereotypical, as I say, the idea of the sort of test by water with dunking of the witch, the noose as well, and the sort of the only thing that we're actually missing for the murdery execution side of historical Doctor Who is in fact sort of the beheadings. I think that that could have been something that maybe brought in if it was in that certain period. But yeah, generally, I love the idea of going into different aspects of legend and sort of the different areas of history as well, and that whole idea of being passed through time and kind of being narrated at the very central point of the story in modern day as well, having Leanne doing these ghost walks and almost going back in time and discovering why these ghost walks are in fact taking place, sort of going into the reality of this ghost walk and then saying why it's happened, the aim behind it, things like that. However, at the very end, it does all have this sci-fi aspect behind it, of having this alien force that was originally kind of a religious cult or something like that, and sort of people have been praising it in the very, very sort of distant past. And I think that I love everything about the sort of historical aspect of the story. However, bringing in the sci-fi aspect in there as well, I think that it's a very nice balance between having quite a lot of historical in there, but at the same time bringing in that sci-fi. It does very nicely go hand in hand. And I think that it has sort of just the right amount of each to kind of both appeal to the sci-fi audience, but at the same time the historical aspect and the historical fan as well. So yeah, as I briefly touched on earlier, with the sound design and general feel of this story is incredibly atmospheric. We're into a few additional credits now. Firstly, as I say, it was directed by Barbie Edwards, and I have noticed that with his stories, it does very much base around that idea of how important the sound design actually is in creating that atmosphere of the different characters and sort of really actually bringing you into the scenario. And I think that I listened to this actually quite late on in the evening, and it didn't actually feel like a very Halloweeny, spooky story, so I do quite like that. The music for this release was composed by Benji Clifford, who is somebody who also does the Big Finish podcast as well, and is generally an all-round quite nice person. He's generally, in fact, a very talented composer for this release. Some of the music elements in this story were very nice. I did especially like the way that we had when the exorcism was taking place, and we had the reveal at the very end, I do believe, of part 3. I think that the music and sound design, particularly for that moment, was very nice, but also just generally the ambient sound in the background as well. We do have a few other additional sound designs by Daniel Burnett in there as well, so yeah, generally quite a few credits for this release that I can give for different sound design. But I think it would be nice to maybe see this team work together a little bit more in the future, because I think that the directing from Barnaby, and then that sort of contrasted with Benji's music, and then that contrasted in there as well with Daniel Burnett's sound design, I think that all goes well together, once again very hand in hand. It's just all a nice sort of awkwardly comforting release. Even though it's a rather spooky one, I think that everything about it, the characters balance really well together, the sound design and the scripting goes really well together, and I think that generally if you're a classic Doctor Who fan, especially sort of the earlier half of classic Doctor Who, you may like this a little bit more. If you're into historical Doctor Who, you will also like this a little bit more, and generally if you're into sort of the paranormal conspiracies and sort of the idea of, as I say, maybe ghost walks or something like that, or mysteries and legends and stuff, and maybe sort of Doctor Who's explanation for certain legends, and this is also a different story for you. Maybe if you like The Visitation, you may like this one, but yeah, different and new and sort of refreshing kind of as well. However, at the same time, still keeping that sort of classic aspect of Doctor Who in there. So I do recommend this one for the more experienced Big Finish listener. I think that maybe for a newcomer, this may be a little bit of a daunting release. However, if you're a fan of the Fifth Doctor and this TARDIS team, then this definitely may be a release worth considering. So I think that this episode does have a few more complex elements to the script, especially where we go back in time in certain parts and the companions get split off as well. It may be a little bit hard to follow in parts, especially around episode 3. There is a little bit of a slump that I think could have maybe been speeded up a little bit more, just to give it a little bit more of a nice fast pace. Yeah, it may suffer a little bit from being 2 hours long. I think it could have been a little bit shorter. That's it for the Big Finish main range for February 2018. Join me in the next Big Finish main range review, where I'll be taking a look at another Fifth Doctor trilogy episode, this time by David Llewellyn, and it is The Serpent in the Silver Mask, which looks a rather colourful one, judging by the cover, so it might be having a little bit of a contrast compared to this story being rather spooky, and the next one being rather alien and sci-fi. So yeah, once again, a rather nice balance for the next trilogy. And in the future, I guess in the next review for Doctor Who, I do believe that there'll be maybe a box set or something like that I may review at some point as well. I don't know. I've actually forgotten what the next months of releases do entail. So yeah, I guess just join me on the next Big Finish review, whatever that may be, and also some other additional Doctor Who reviews in there as well, coming in the next few weeks. Yeah, thanks for watching, and as I see you all next time. Bye for now.